The crucibles smelled like old blood and burnt metal. It was a massive station that floated in the dark space above the gas giant Vorath 9, spinning slowly like a dead eye watching the stars. Inside, thousands of aliens packed the stands every night, screaming for violence, betting fortunes on death. The Dravosi Syndicate owned it all. They owned the station, they owned the fighters, they owned the blood that soaked into the arena sand and never truly washed out. The slave ship docked at the lower levels just after the third rotation cycle. Its cargo bay doors opened with a rusty groan, and the new batch of prisoners stumbled out into the harsh white light of the processing hall. There were 12 of them this time. Most were large, a Grethic male with broken tusks, 2 Velthari females with their tails cut short, a handful of species that the guards didn't bother identifying. And at the back of the line, so small that the guards almost missed her, was a human. Her name was Kale Vasquez. She was 22 years old. She stood 5 feet and 4 inches tall, with short dark hair cut close to her skull, and a thin frame that looked like it had survived on emergency rations for weeks. Her clothes were torn, her wrists were raw from the restraints. But her eyes were calm. They moved slowly across the processing hall, taking in every detail. The position of the guards, the layout of the doors, the pattern of the lights on the ceiling. She said nothing. A Dravosi guard walked down the line, scanning each prisoner with a handheld device. When he reached Kale, he stopped. He looked down at her. Then he looked at his device. Then he looked at her again. "What is this?" he said. "Human," said the slaver behind him. Her survey ship crossed into Syndicate space. The guard made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She's barely a meal for a Grethic. What are we supposed to do with her?" "Sell her, fight her, feed her to something. I don't care. She's on the manifest." Kale watched this exchange without expression. She had learned in the weeks since her capture that reacting to anything only made things worse. So she kept her mouth shut and her eyes open, and she memorized the guard's face, the number on his badge, and the weapon on his hip. They moved her into the holding pens with the others. The pens were underground, deep beneath the arena floor, carved into the station's metal bones. The air was thick and hot and stank of sweat and fear. Cages lined both walls, most of them occupied. Massive creatures paced behind the bars. Some of them had scars that told stories of dozens of fights. Some of them were missing limbs. All of them looked at the new arrivals with dead eyes. Kale was pushed into a cell barely big enough to lie down in. The door slammed shut. She sat on the cold floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and continued watching. An hour later, the arena master came. His name was Gorvon, and he was a Thessic, 8 feet tall, 4 arms, skin like cracked gray stone. He walked through the holding pens like a farmer inspecting livestock, which was exactly what he was doing. His advisor, a thin creature called Medic, who belonged to a species Kale didn't recognize, followed behind him with a data tablet, reading out the details of each new arrival. "The Grethic male is damaged, but usable, mid-tier at best," Medic said. "The Velthari pair could be trained for team combat. The rest are filler." Gorvon grunted. He stopped in front of Kale's cell. "And this? Human female, age 22 standard cycles, no combat record, no notable physical traits. Death world origin, class 12, but physically unremarkable compared to other Death world species." Gorvon leaned down and looked at Kale through the bars. She looked back at him. She didn't flinch, she didn't look away. She just sat there, small and still, and met the gaze of a creature that could crush her skull with one hand. "Throw her out," Gorvon said. "She's not worth the food." "If I may," Medic said carefully. A human has never fought in the crucible. Novelty has value. The crowd loves a spectacle, even a short one, and the betting halls will generate revenue on the curiosity alone. Gorvan considered this. He looked at Kale again. She still hadn't moved. Fine, he said. Give her a number. Put her in the first rotation. But I'm not wasting resources on her. Minimum rations, scrap equipment. If she dies in the first fight, we write it off. Medic tapped his tablet. Registered. Stock 7 Sigma. Kale watched them go. She watched the way Gorvan walked, where he put his weight, which of his forearms he favored. She watched Medic's tablet, and the way his fingers moved across it. She listened to their footsteps until they faded. Then she looked around her cell. She looked at the bars. She looked at the lock. She looked at the ventilation grate above her head. She looked at the wall where it met the floor, and she noticed that the metal was thin there, corroded by years of moisture. She noticed everything. She always did. In the cell next to hers, a massive reptilian creature lay on its side, watching her with one half-open eye. It was a Velthari, old, heavily scarred, with deep claw marks running down the left side of its face. One of its horns was broken. It had the look of something that had survived a very long time, in a place designed to kill it. "You're dead," the Velthari said. Its voice was deep and rough. "You know that." Kale turned her head to look at it. "Maybe," she said. It was the first word she had spoken since they brought her aboard. The Velthari grunted. "I've seen 100 new ones come through here with hope in their eyes. They all end up the same way. Red stains on the sand." "I don't have hope in my eyes," Kale said quietly. The Velthari studied her for a long moment. Then it closed its eye and said nothing more. In the arena above, the crowd roared at something Kale couldn't see. The sound traveled through the metal and the rock, and vibrated in her chest like a second heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed, and then went silent. Kale closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She listened. She counted the intervals between the guard patrols. She measured the echo of footsteps to estimate the distance to the main corridor. She felt the vibration of the station's engines through the floor, and memorized their rhythm. Tomorrow, they would give her a weapon and send her out to die for the amusement of creatures that thought she was nothing. They had no idea what she was. That same night, in his private viewing chamber above the arena, Gorvan pulled up the holographic fight schedule for the next cycle. He slotted Stock 7 Sigma into the first match of the undercard, and picked her opponent. A Grethic juvenile, young and aggressive and eager to make a name. He chuckled as he confirmed the match. "Put the little human girl against the whelp," he told Medic. "Let the crowd have their joke before the real fights begin." Medic nodded and logged the order. Far below in her tiny cell, Kale Vasquez opened her eyes in the dark. She had finished her count. 14 guards on rotation. 7-minute intervals. 3 blind spots between the pens and the eastern gate. She closed her eyes again. She could wait. They gave her a sword that was barely sharp enough to cut bread. The blade was short, chipped along the edge, and the handle was wrapped in old leather that was coming apart. For a shield, they handed her a square piece of scrap metal with a strap bolted to the back. It weighed almost nothing, which meant it would stop almost nothing. Kale held the sword up and tested its balance. She turned it in her hand. She pressed her thumb against the edge and felt how dull it was. Then she looked at the shield and saw that the strap was loose. She tightened it with her teeth and said nothing. The guards led her up through a narrow tunnel that opened into the lower arena. This was not the Grand Crucible, where the famous fights happened. This was the pit, a smaller, dirtier space with stone walls stained dark and sand that crunched under her feet in a way that told her it was mixed with things she didn't want to think about. The stands above held maybe 1,000 spectators. Most of them were drunk. Most of them were barely paying attention. The announcer's voice echoed through the pit in a language Kale's translator chip turned into flat, emotionless words. Opening match, Stock 7 Sigma, Human Female versus Graphic Juvenile, unranked. A few aliens in the crowd looked down. Some of them laughed. One of them threw a piece of food that landed near her feet. Kale didn't look up. She looked at the gate on the opposite side of the pit. The gate opened. The Graphic Juvenile came out fast. It was 7 feet tall, which meant it was still growing. Its skin was thick and gray, covered in natural armor plates that overlapped like roof tiles. Its tusks curved up from its lower jaw, each one as long as Kale's forearm. Its eyes were small and red and furious. It wanted to kill. It wanted to climb. It saw Kale and made a sound that was something between a laugh and a growl. The horn sounded. The fight began. The Graphic charged. It covered the distance between them in 3 massive steps, each one shaking the ground. It swung a fist the size of Kale's torso directly at her head. She wasn't there. Kale moved to the left, low and fast, and the fist went past her close enough to feel the wind. The Graphic stumbled forward, confused. It turned. She was already behind it. It swung again. She ducked under the arm and moved to the right. The crowd went quiet for a moment, then laughed. They thought she was running. They thought she was delaying the end. She was not running. The Graphic roared and charged again. This time it led with its tusks, lowering its head like a battering ram. Kale planted her feet, waited until the last possible second, and then twisted sideways. The Graphic's tusk scraped across her scrap metal shield and sent sparks flying. The force spun her around, and she used the spin. As the creature rushed past her, she dragged her dull blade across the back of its knee, where the armor plates didn't quite meet. The Graphic screamed. Not in pain, the cut was shallow, but in shock. It spun around and stared at her with those small red eyes, and for the first time there was something other than anger in them. Kale was bleeding. The tusk had caught her shoulder, and red blood was running down her arm. She shifted the sword to her other hand without missing a step. She kept moving. Always moving. Her feet never stayed in one place for more than a second. The Graphic attacked again, and again, and again. Each time, Kale was somewhere else. She didn't block. She didn't try to match its strength. She simply refused to be where its attacks landed. And every time it missed, she made it pay. A cut here, a slash there. Nothing deep, nothing fatal, just enough to bleed. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The Graphic was breathing hard. Its charges were slower. Its swings were wider and less controlled. Sweat or something like it poured down its armored skin. It had never fought anything that lasted this long. Every opponent it had ever faced had either tried to fight back with strength or tried to run. This human did neither. She just kept moving, kept cutting, kept bleeding at one small wound at a time. The crowd was no longer laughing. They were leaning forward in their seats. The drunks had put down their drinks. Something was happening that they didn't understand, and it made them uncomfortable. Kale was hurting. Her shoulder was on fire. She had taken a glancing blow to the ribs that made every breath feel like swallowing glass. Her legs were shaking from the constant movement. But she had grown up on Earth, a world where her ancestors had chased animals across open plains for hours, until the animals simply collapsed from exhaustion. Her body was built for this, not for explosive power, not for armor or claws or venom, for endurance, for the long chase, for the slow, patient hunt that ended not with a roar, but with a quiet, steady heartbeat that refused to stop. The Graphic stumbled, just a small stumble. One knee dipped. Kale struck. She came in low, under its guard, and drove her dull blade into the back of its knee, the same spot she had been cutting for 10 minutes. This time, the blade went deep. The Grethic's leg buckled. It crashed down onto one knee, with a sound like a tree falling. It swung at her wildly. She stepped back. It tried to rise. Its leg wouldn't hold. It roared in fury and confusion, and something that was starting to sound like fear. Kale circled behind it. She was calm. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, without slowing down. She found the gap in the armor at the base of the Grethic's neck, the spot where the plates were thinnest, where the arteries ran close to the surface. She had seen this gap when the creature first emerged from the gate. She had been waiting to use it. She drove the blade in, one clean thrust. The Grethic made a sound like air escaping from a punctured hull. Its red eyes went wide. Then they went dim. It fell forward into the sand and did not move again. The pit was silent. Kale stood over the body. She was swaying on her feet. Her arm was soaked in blood, some of it hers, some of it not. Her chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths. She looked up at the crowd with those calm, unblinking eyes. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the pit erupted into noise. Not cheering, not booing, but something raw and confused. They didn't know what they had just seen. They only knew it shouldn't have happened. In his viewing chamber, Gorvon watched the replay 3 times. He watched the way the human moved. He watched the way she targeted the same spot over and over. He watched the way she controlled the pace of the entire fight, without ever throwing a single power strike. "What is she?" he said quietly. Metic pulled up the file on humans. He read it twice. Then he looked at Gorvon with an expression that the arena master had never seen on his advisor's face before. "Deathworld persistence predator," Metic said. "Their species evolved to chase prey across long distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They don't need to be the strongest or the fastest. They just need to not stop." Gorvon said nothing for a long time. "Move her to mid-tier," he finally said. "Better food, better equipment. She just made me a fortune in surprise bets, and she'll make me more." Down in the holding pens, the guards threw Kale back into her cell. She landed hard on the floor and lay there for a moment, feeling every bruise and cut. Then she sat up and began cleaning her wounds with a strip torn from her shirt. In the cell next to hers, the old Velthari, Rorash, was watching her. He had seen the fight on the small screen mounted in the corridor. He had watched every second of it. "You've done that before," he said. "Not the arena, but the killing." Kale pressed the cloth against the cut above her eye and didn't answer. Rorash studied her for a long moment. "You're not just surviving in here, are you?" Kale looked at him, and in that second, Rorash saw something in those calm human eyes that made the scales on the back of his neck rise. Then she looked away and went back to cleaning her wounds. Outside, in the betting halls, the odds on Stock 7 Sigma quietly shifted. Over the next 6 weeks, Kale Vasquez fought 11 times. She won 9. She lost 2. Both losses nearly killed her. The first loss came against a Drothi, a tall, thin creature with 4 joints in each arm, and reflexes so fast that Kale couldn't track its strikes. It hit her 17 times in under a minute. She went down hard, and the guards carried her back to her cell with 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a concussion that kept her in the dark for 2 days. The second loss came against a pair of Morvek twins in a team fight. They worked together like 2 halves of one mind, and Kale had no partner. They drove her into a corner, and one of them slashed her across the back with a blade that cut deep enough to scrape bone. She collapsed. The crowd called for the kill. But the Morveks hesitated, just for a second, because Kale was looking up at them with blood pouring down her back, and she was still trying to stand. That hesitation saved her. The horn sounded the end of the round before they could finish. Both times, they expected her to die in her cell. Both times, they were wrong. Human bodies are strange machines. They break easily, but they fix themselves with a stubbornness that borders on madness. Bones knit, skin closes, bruises fade. Given enough protein, enough water, enough sleep, a human body will rebuild itself from damage that would permanently cripple most species in the galaxy. Gorvan noticed this. He ordered her rations doubled, not out of kindness, but because dead investments don't make money. Kale ate everything they gave her. She slept in precise 4-hour cycles. She exercised in her cell. Push-ups, squats, stretches, movements so quiet that the guards never heard them. And between fights, she studied. She asked Rorash about every species in the arena. The old Velthari had been fighting in the Crucible for 9 cycles. He knew them all. "Tell me about the Drothi," Kale said one night, sitting against the bars that separated their cells. Fastest thing in the arena. 4-jointed arms mean they can strike from angles you can't predict. But their bones are hollow. They trade durability for speed. "Hollow bones," Kale repeated. She filed it away. "The Korvathi?" Rorash nodded. "Strongest species here. Chitin-plated skin, natural armor over most of their body. They can take punishment that would kill anything else." "Where's the armor thinnest?" Kale asked. Rorash looked at her. "Joints, inner thighs, base of the throat, under the arms. Why?" "Just curious." But they both knew she wasn't just curious. Something changed between them during those weeks. Rorash had been alone in the Crucible for a long time. He had stopped caring about the other fighters years ago. Caring about someone in a place built to kill them was a waste of energy. She listened to him. She asked questions that no one had ever asked. And she looked at him not like a fellow prisoner, but like a partner. One night, after a particularly bad fight that left Kale with a swollen eye and a limp, Rorash said something he hadn't said to anyone in years. "I was a soldier," he told her, "before they captured me. I fought in the border wars against the Syndicate. They took me alive because killing me would have been too quick." Kale looked at him through the bars. "How many cycles?" 9. 9 cycles in this place," she said quietly, "and you're still alive. Surviving isn't the same as living." "No," Kale agreed, "it's not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if it could be?" Rorash studied her. There was something in her voice that he hadn't heard before. Not hope. He'd learned to distrust hope a long time ago. Something more dangerous. "What are you planning?" he asked. "I'll tell you when it's time," she said, and she closed her eyes. The weeks passed. Kale fought her way through the mid-tier ranks with a mechanical precision that began to disturb even the arena staff. She didn't fight like the other gladiators. She didn't rely on rage or adrenaline or brute force. She fought like a scientist conducting experiments. Each match was a test. Each opponent was a problem to be solved. She fought a Drothi again. A different one, bigger and faster than the first. This time, she didn't try to match its speed. She baited it into overextending, caught one of its 4-jointed arms at the wrong angle, and snapped the hollow bone with a single sharp twist. The Drothi screamed and folded. The fight was over in 3 minutes. She fought a Thesic, the same species as Gorvan, 4 arms, stone-hard skin. She spent the first 5 minutes doing nothing but dodging, letting it exhaust itself swinging at air. When it slowed down, she went for the eyes. Thesic's skin was hard everywhere, except the thin membrane covering the eyes. She blinded it in one eye with a thrown handful of sand, then took it apart from the blind side. She fought a creature whose name she never learned, something massive and slow with 6 legs and acid spit. She figured out in 30 seconds that it couldn't turn quickly. She stayed behind it for the entire fight, cutting the tendons in its back legs one by one until it couldn't move. The crowd started to notice. At first, she had been a joke, the tiny human who somehow kept surviving. But survival turned into wins, and winds turned into a streak, and a streak turned into a name. The crowd called her the Persistence, and they said it with a mixture of excitement and unease. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't dramatic. She was efficient and quiet and relentless, and there was something deeply unsettling about watching her work. The betting halls were chaos. Underground bookmakers had made fortunes off her early fights, when no one believed she could win. Now the odds were shifting, and serious money was moving. Her fights were no longer on the undercard. They were featured events. And through all of it, Kale kept watching. She watched the guards, she watched the gates, she watched the ventilation system, and the power conduits, and the way the station hummed at different times of the cycle. She noticed that the eastern gate's lock had a 2-second delay. She noticed that the guard shifts overlapped for 90 seconds during the transition. She noticed that the main power line for the holding pens ran through a junction box in the corridor outside Rorash's cell. She noticed everything. She always did. The other gladiators noticed her too, not just as a fighter, but as something else. She talked to them, quietly, carefully, in the dark hours when the guards were far away. She talked to the ones who still had fire in their eyes. She talked to the ones who remembered what freedom felt like. She didn't make promises. She didn't give speeches. She just asked them one simple question. When the time comes, will you be ready? Most of them said yes. Then the announcement came. Gorvan's voice boomed through the holding pens, on every speaker. The crowd upstairs was already chanting. The galactic broadcast networks had been promoting it for days. Main event, championship deathmatch. Stock 7 Sigma, the Persistence, versus champion Dragoth Var. No quarter, no surrender. Dragoth Var, the Korvathi champion, undefeated for 11 cycles, 9 feet tall, covered in chitin armor, wielding a plasma-edged great axe that had split opponents in half. 214 kills in the arena. He was the closest thing the Crucible had to a god. The holding pens went silent. Rorash gripped the bars of his cell and looked at Kale. His old eyes were full of something she had never seen in them before. Fear, not for himself, for her. They're sending you to die, he said. Kale was sitting on the floor of her cell, wrapping her hands with strips of cloth. She looked up at him with those calm, steady eyes. The same eyes she'd had since the day they brought her here. The same eyes that had watched a Grethic die. The same eyes that had studied every wall, every lock, every guard rotation in this station. They've been saying that since the beginning, she said. She went back to wrapping her hands. Rorash watched her, and despite everything he knew about this place and the death that lived in it, he felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in 9 cycles. The Grand Crucible was full. Every seat, every standing platform, every skybox was packed with bodies. 80,000 aliens screaming under the hot white lights. The sound was like a living thing, a wall of noise that pressed against the skin and made the air vibrate. Above the arena, holographic screens the size of buildings broadcast the event to 300 star systems. Millions were watching. The commentators spoke in a dozen languages, and they all said the same thing. Tonight, the little human dies. In the skyboxes, the Dravasi elite sat in their cushioned chairs, drinking expensive liquids and placing bets that could buy warships. Gorvan was among them, dressed in ceremonial armor, his 4 arms folded across his massive chest. He had made more money off Kale Vasquez than any gladiator in the last 5 cycles. But tonight would be the end of it. Dragoth Var did not lose, and the death of the human would be the most watched event in Crucible history. The western gate opened first. Dragoth Var walked into the arena, and the crowd became something beyond noise. He was 9 feet tall. His body was covered in chitin plates that gleamed dark red under the lights, thick as ship hull plating. His arms were as wide as Kale's entire body. In his right hand, he carried a great axe with a plasma edge that glowed faint blue, a weapon designed to cut through armored vehicles. His face was flat and broad, with deep-set yellow eyes that showed nothing. No anger, no excitement. Just the blank confidence of a creature that had never been challenged. He walked to the center of the arena and stood there. He didn't raise his arms to the crowd. He didn't roar. He didn't need to. He was a god in this place, and gods don't perform. The eastern gate opened. Kale stepped out onto the sand. It became sharper, higher, laced with laughter. She looked absurd. 5 feet 4 inches of pale skin and lean muscle, wearing light leather armor that covered her chest and thighs and nothing else. She carried a standard short sword, a real one this time, sharp and balanced, the best weapon Gorvan had given her. No shield. Her hands were wrapped in cloth. Her dark hair was pushed back from her face. The cut above her eye from her last fight had healed into a thin white scar. She walked toward the center of the arena. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Dragoth. The galactic commentators filled the silence with words. An extraordinary mismatch, one said. The human has had a remarkable run, but this is simply a different class of opponent. Dragoth Var has killed opponents 3 times her size. This will be quick. Another commentator laughed. The human is entertaining, I'll give her that. The horn sounded. Dragoth moved first. He closed the distance in 2 enormous strides, and swung the great axe in a horizontal arc that would have cut Kale in half at the waist. The plasma edge screamed through the air, leaving a trail of blue light. Kale dropped flat. The axe passed over her so close that it singed the tips of her hair. She rolled sideways and was on her feet before Dragoth could pull the weapon back for a second swing. He swung again, vertical this time, straight down, hard enough to crack the arena floor. Kale was already gone, moving to his left, circling, keeping distance. The impact threw sand into the air and left a glowing scar in the stone beneath. The crowd cheered. This was what they wanted. The little human dancing, dodging, delaying the end. It was entertainment. It was comedy. Dragoth didn't chase. He waited. Let Kale circle, and then struck when she committed to a direction. His backhand caught her across the chest. Not the axe, just his fist, and the force of it lifted her off her feet and sent her flying 10 feet across the sand. She hit the ground hard. The crowd roared. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. She stood up. Dragoth tilted his head, just slightly. She should not have stood up from that. He hit her again. This time he caught her with a sweeping kick that connected with her hip and spun her sideways. She crashed into the arena wall. Something cracked. A rib, maybe 2. She made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a grunt. She stood up. The crowd was still cheering, but the tone was starting to change. There was an edge to it now, an uncertainty. Dragoth came at her with the axe. 3 fast swings, each one designed to end the fight. Kale dodged the first 2 and caught the third on her sword. Not blocking it, because no human arm could block a Korvathi's full swing, but deflecting it, angling the blade so the axe slid past her. The shock of the contact ran up her arm, and she felt the bones in her wrist groan, but she held on. She didn't counterattack, not yet. Dragoth pressed forward. He was fast for his size, faster than anything that heavy had a right to be. He swung in combinations that had killed creatures 10 times Kale's weight. She dodged some. She deflected others. She took hits that would have broken a lesser body, and she stayed on her feet through sheer refusal to fall. 5 minutes. The commentators had gone quiet. 10 minutes. The crowd had stopped cheering. 15 minutes. Dragoth was breathing harder. Not much, a fraction. His swings were carrying a tiny bit less force. His recovery between attacks was a tiny bit slower. No one in the stands noticed. No one watching on the broadcast noticed. Kale noticed. She had been counting. She always counted. She counted his breaths, his steps, the time between his swings. She had mapped his patterns in the first 3 minutes. She had tested them in the next 5. She had confirmed them in the 5 after that. And now she knew him. She knew him better than he knew himself. She knew that his left side was 1/10 of a second slower than his right. She knew that he dropped his guard by 2 inches after every third swing. She knew that his chitin armor was thinnest at the inner elbow joints, at the base of his throat, and at the backs of his knees. She had been losing this fight on purpose. Not losing, surviving. Letting him spend his energy. Letting him believe he was winning. Taking the hits she could afford to take. Bleeding where the bleeding wouldn't kill her. Waiting. Humans didn't evolve to win fights in the first minute. They evolved to win fights in the last. She shifted. It was subtle. She stopped backing away. She stopped circling wide. She came in close, inside the arc of the great axe, where it was too long to swing effectively. Dragoth adjusted, tried to use the handle as a bar to push her back. She ducked under it and cut him across the inner elbow. The blade bit through the thin chitin. Dragoth's arm seized. A thin line of dark blood, the first blood anyone had drawn from him in years, appeared on his skin. The crowd gasped. Kale didn't pause. She was inside his guard now, and she worked with the cold precision of a surgeon. She targeted the joints, the tendons, the nerve clusters she had spent weeks studying from Rorash's descriptions, and from every Korvathi anatomy file she could get Metic to accidentally leave on a screen near her cell. She cut the back of his knee. She slashed the tendon above his ankle. She opened a wound under his arm, where the chitin plates separated when he raised the axe. Dragoth roared. For the first time in 11 cycles, he roared not in triumph, but in pain and confusion. He swung wildly, and Kale read every swing before it came. She was inside his head now. She was inside his body's rhythm. She knew what he was going to do before he did. He swung the axe down with everything he had. Kale stepped to the side, caught his wrist, and drove her blade into the nerve cluster at his inner elbow. His fingers spasmed. The great axe fell from his hand and hit the sand with a heavy thud. The arena made no sound at all. Dragoth stared at his empty hand. Then he looked at Kale, and for the first time in his existence, the undefeated champion of the Crucible felt something he had never felt before. Fear. He looked into her eyes and saw no rage, no hatred, no desperation, just calm, absolute, unwavering focus. The eyes of a predator that has already decided its prey is finished. The eyes of a species that once chased animals across entire continents until the animals' hearts gave out from exhaustion. He swung at her with his bare fist. She ducked. He swung again. She slipped past it and cut his other knee. He staggered. His legs were failing. Blood was running from a dozen wounds, and every one of them was in exactly the right place. He fell to one knee. The sound of the greatest gladiator in Crucible history hitting the sand with one knee echoed through a silent arena. Kale stood in front of him. She was a wreck. Blood covered half her face. Her left arm hung at an angle that said something was broken. Her ribs screamed with every breath. She was swaying on her feet, kept upright by nothing but the stubbornness written into her DNA by 100,000 years of evolution on a world that tried to kill her species every single day. Dragoth looked up at her. 9 feet of Korvathi warrior, brought to his knees by a creature half his size. She found the gap at the base of his throat, the one Rorash had told her about, the one she had been planning to reach since the moment the fight was announced. She drove the blade in, quick and clean. A mercy, though he didn't deserve one. Dragoth Var's yellow eyes went wide. Then they went empty. He fell forward, and the sand caught him the way it had caught 214 others before him. Only this time, it was his blood soaking into the ground. Kale stepped back. She was barely standing. The sword hung loose in her hand. Blood dripped from her fingers and made small dark circles in the sand. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then the grand crucible erupted, not in celebration, in shock, in disbelief, in something that tasted like the beginning of fear. 80,000 voices, screaming at once, because the universe had just shown them something impossible, and they didn't know how to hold it. In the skyboxes, the Dravasi elite were on their feet. Some of them were pale. Some of them were already calling their security. Gorvon gripped the railing with all 4 hands and stared down at the tiny, bloody, broken human standing over the corpse of his champion. Across 300 star systems, millions of beings watched in silence. The commentators found no words. And on the arena floor, Kale Vasquez, Stock 7 Sigma, the Persistence, the little human girl, stood alone under the lights, breathing, bleeding, alive. She looked up at the skyboxes. She looked directly at Gorvon. The guards dragged her off the arena floor, while the crowd was still screaming. 4 of them held her arms and legs, and a 5th walked ahead with a shock baton ready. They were scared. Kale could feel it in the way they gripped her. Too tight, too fast. Men who weren't scared didn't hold things that hard. They threw her into her cell and slammed the door. 2 guards stayed outside, weapons drawn, watching her like she was a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. She lay on the cold floor and let herself feel the pain. It came in waves. Her broken ribs, the fracture in her left arm, the deep bruise on her hip where Dragoth's kick had landed, the dozen cuts that were still bleeding through her armor. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat sent fire through her chest. And she was smiling. Rorash was pressed against the bars between their cells, his old reptilian face tight with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You actually did it," he whispered. Kale turned her head to look at him. Her face was covered in dried blood, and one eye was swollen nearly shut, but the other eye was clear and steady, and burning with something that Rorash had learned to recognize over these past weeks. "That wasn't the hard part," she said. Rorash went still. "You mean, it's tonight." Above them, the crucible was in chaos. The crowd had spilled out of the stands and into the corridors. Some were rioting. Some were fighting each other. The security forces were stretched thin, trying to control 80,000 panicking aliens who had just watched their god die. In his skybox, Gorvon was shouting into a communication device. His 4 hands were shaking. "I want her terminated. Tonight. I don't care how. Cut the air to her cell. Send in a kill squad. I want that thing dead before the next cycle." Medic stood beside him, quiet for once. He was staring at the arena floor, where cleaning drones were already scrubbing Dragoth's blood from the sand. He had seen a lot of things in his years serving the Crucible. He had never seen anything like what happened tonight. "If I may," Medic said carefully, "killing her now could cause problems. The crowd is terrified. They should be. I'm terrified." Gorvon slammed one of his fists against the wall. "She's not just a fighter, Medic. She's something else. Did you see her eyes? She wasn't fighting for survival. She was fighting for something else. And that's more dangerous than anything in my arena." He was right, but he was already too late. In the holding pens, Kale sat up. The pain screamed at her to lie down. She ignored it. She had been ignoring pain her entire life. It told her what was broken and what still worked. And right now, enough still worked. She moved to the bars and pressed her face close to the corridor. The 2 guards outside her cell were watching the chaos on their personal screens, distracted. The shift change was in 12 minutes. She had counted the guard rotations every single day for 6 weeks. She knew this schedule better than the guards themselves. She reached into her mouth and pulled out a small piece of metal she had hidden under her tongue before the fight. It was a fragment from the scrap metal shield they had given her in her very first match. A tiny piece she had broken off and kept hidden for weeks, slowly sharpening it against the cell floor during the dark hours. It was thin enough to fit inside a standard Dravosi lock mechanism. She reached through the bars and went to work. That was how long the guard shifts overlapped, when 6 guards were in the corridor instead of 3, and they were all busy talking to each other. She had planned for this. The lock clicked open just as the outgoing guards turned to leave, and the incoming guards were still settling in. She slipped out of her cell like smoke. The first guard didn't see her. She came up behind him, wrapped one arm around his throat, and used his own shock baton to put him down silently. The second guard turned at the sound of a body hitting the floor, and she threw the metal fragment into his eye. He screamed, but only for a moment, because she had already taken the first guard's weapon and used it on him. 3 guards down in 8 seconds. She took a keycard from the unconscious body and moved down the corridor. She opened Rorash's cell first. The old Velthari stepped out and stretched his scarred body. His eyes were bright for the first time in 9 cycles. Kale handed him a weapon. "Eastern corridor," she said. "Junction box. You know the one." Rorash nodded and moved. Kale went the other way. She opened cells as she went. Every cell she passed, every fighter she had spoken to in the dark hours, every slave who had told her yes when she asked if they would be ready. They stepped out one by one. A Drathi female with murder in her eyes, a Thessic male who had been in the pens for 7 cycles, 2 Morvek brothers who had been forced to fight each other for entertainment, a dozen others, all of them broken, all of them angry, all of them ready. Kale didn't give speeches. She gave orders. Quick, clear, simple. "You 3, the armory is 2 levels up, 3rd corridor on the right. Take everything. You 2, the communication array is on the upper deck. Don't destroy it. I need it. The rest of you, follow me. Stay quiet until I give the signal." The Crucible's security was designed to keep prisoners in cells, not to handle a coordinated assault by dozens of trained killers who knew the layout of the station better than the guards did. Because Kale had mapped it all. Every corridor, every junction, every blind spot. She had assembled the plan in her head over 6 weeks, without writing down a single word, because paper could be found but memory couldn't. Rorash reached the junction box. He ripped the cover off and cut the power line to the holding pen security grid. Every electronic lock in the lower levels clicked open at once. More gladiators spilled into the corridors. Some of them didn't even know what was happening. They just saw open doors and armed fighters, and they followed. The armory fell in 3 minutes. The Drathi female and her team hit it hard and fast, and the 2 guards inside never had a chance. Weapons poured out into waiting hands. Real weapons, plasma blades, shock rifles, heavy armor. Kale led the main group up through the service tunnels toward the command center. They met resistance on the 4th level, a squad of Dravosi security with heavy weapons. Kale held up a fist. Everyone stopped. She studied the corridor. She counted the guards. She noted their positions, their weapons, their sight lines. Then she assigned roles. The Thessic would take point because his stone-hard skin could absorb the first volley. The Morvek brothers would flank through the maintenance shaft on the left. Kale and 3 others would come from behind through a ventilation duct she had mapped on her 2nd day in the Crucible. The assault lasted 40 seconds. Every guard went down. They reached the command center as the station's alarm systems finally activated. Red lights flooded the corridors. Emergency bulkheads began closing. But Kale had planned for that too. She had one of the freed gladiators, a species with acid-producing glands, burning through the bulkhead controls as fast as they could close. The command center doors blew open. Gorvon was inside, surrounded by his personal guard. He turned and saw Kale standing in the doorway, bloody, broken, barely standing, and absolutely terrifying. "You," he breathed. Rorash came through the secondary entrance behind the guards. They didn't last long. Gorvon fell to his knees. 9 cycles of owning people, of selling blood for entertainment, of sitting in his comfortable chair while others died for his profit. It all ended on the floor of his own command center, with a tiny human standing over him. Kale didn't kill him. She needed him alive, for now. She walked to the main communication console. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from blood loss and exhaustion. She entered the broadcast frequency she had memorized from watching Medic operate the system. The signal went out on every open channel, reaching the Syndicate fleet, the betting halls, the galactic news networks, everyone. She leaned into the microphone and spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, the same voice she had used in her cell, in the arena, in every quiet conversation in the dark. "This is Kale Vasquez, human, stock 7 Sigma. The crucible is ours. The slaves are free. Every being held in this station is now under my protection. If the Syndicate wants this station back, you're welcome to try. But you watched what I did to your champion. Imagine what happens when it's not just me." She cut the signal. Outside the viewport, the Syndicate fleet hung in the dark. 12 warships, bristling with weapons, more than enough firepower to reduce the station to dust. They had been scrambled the moment the uprising began. Their commanders were waiting for orders. The orders didn't come. Because somewhere in the Syndicate command structure, someone was doing the math. A single human had killed their undefeated champion, engineered a prison revolt, and captured a fortified station, all while half dead from a fight that should have killed her. And now she had an army of freed gladiators behind her, every one of them a trained killer, and she was the one giving them orders. The fleet held its position, and it waited. In the command center, Rorash stood beside Kale, looking out at the ships through the viewport. The freed gladiators were securing the rest of the station behind them. The sounds of fighting were fading, replaced by something Rorash hadn't heard in 9 cycles. Voices speaking without fear. "What are you thinking?" Rorash asked. Kale was sitting in the command chair, the chair that had belonged to Gorvon and to arena masters before him. She was wrapped in bandages and held together by nothing but stubbornness. Her dark hair was matted with blood. One arm was in a splint. She looked like she should be dead. She looked out at the stars. "I'm thinking about going home," she said. Rorash looked at the fleet hanging in the darkness. 12 warships, too afraid to move. "I don't think they'll let you," he said. Kale smiled. That same calm, quiet smile she had worn since the day they first threw her in a cell and told her she was nothing. "I wasn't asking for permission." Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds and 1,000 stations, the broadcast played and replayed. Species that had never heard of Earth searched their databases with trembling hands. The entry was short and dry and had been ignored for centuries. Humans. Planet of origin. Earth. Classification. Class 12. Death World. Evolutionary advantage. Persistence predation. Extreme environmental adaptability. Advanced pattern recognition. Cooperative social bonding under duress. Threat assessment, pending review. By morning, the threat assessment had been updated. It read, unresolved. And in the command center of a stolen station, surrounded by an army of freed slaves who called her commander, a small human woman with calm eyes and blood on her hands looked out at the stars and began planning her next move. She could wait. She was very good at waiting. But the galaxy was about to learn that when a human was done waiting, Nothing in the universe could stand in the way.